This is for all you non-philosophizing black sheep, unwelcome, pushed to the side motherfuckers like me.
Fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah. Fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way. Let's get down to business. These bitches got glitches. And you thought you'd dismiss us? Nah. Now I'm laughing in stitches. See, the problem be, it'll be a tragic travesty to come after me. So just know this is how we get down. Respect that shit like a pronoun, bitch. Yeah. Fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah. And fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah. Fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah. Fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way.
What up, though?
Hey, everybody.
You know what? Let me shift myself because this is not a show about moi. This is about a show about these fellas up here. Please, gentlemen, introduce yourselves to this wonderful broadcast.
Well, I'm Joshua Bowen. I'm an extremely accomplished Assyriologist who has a PhD in Assyriology, a master's in I just looked at it, divinity, right? Theology. And I have published several fantastic books. You may have heard of them. They're the Atheist Handbook, the Old Testament 1 and 2, How to Pray in a Dead Language, the Introductory Guide to Reading Ancient Sumerian, and there's a bunch of other stuff. And I just want you to know that I'm really excited about being on this show tonight.
You sound like such a nerd.
I hear you know a lot about slavery, but we'll talk about that later. And you, sir?
Sorry, I didn't memorize Pat's resume.
That's why I did it on purpose.
Damn it. Well, I mean, I kicked the shit out of somebody last night. You know what I mean? That's what I know.
You can put that on your resume. Or his resume. Fuck it, whatever.
I don't think I'm going to.
But Pat, you should, I mean, Josh, you should tell everybody about me then.
Well, okay. So Pat's a really great guy. He came into academics late, so he's actually a newcomer. Pat has a master's degree in ancient history and a second master's degree in Mediterranean archaeology. And as long as he's able to get his funding in place, he'll be continuing on with a dissertation that's studying basically the transformation of space, of religious space in antiquity. And he's a really nice guy. But he's
one of the
written
things that I really like, though, like one of the things that I really like about Josh is when he uses the word layers in his book. When he talks about archaeology. I love that.
Layers is like my thing, like cakes. It's when I talk about cakes and archaeology and cakes should, layers.
Yes, layers.
All right. Well, I mean, I know about cakes, but anyway, it's not about me. Well, I'm Jena Miyu. I'm just the chief producer of this fantastic show that we have called Can You Dig It? And I'm just going to facilitate my time in the back room so y'all can have your piece alone with the lovely audience. Thank you all for showing up, by the way. Give us a bit of an introduction about what the show is about, and I'm going to sneak on in the back.
Thank you, Jena.
Yeah, thanks, Jena. And by the way, before Josh and I start, we'll be played a little straighter now. Jena's a big reason this is happening. If this would not be getting off the ground, there's a lot of moving parts to this. So before everybody settles in, generally popping in and out, but don't think that she's not more than half of why this is happening. Josh and I are just showing up and coming on video.
I don't even know what we're doing here, actually.
I don't I couldn't do the production and all the other stuff that she has to do to get this show off the ground. So please keep your hearts and thumbs ups coming for Jena throughout this. So you want to go ahead and talk a little bit, Josh, about what we think this show's going to be? Even though
yes, I do definitely right now talk about the show. I guess the show in general, right, is about archaeology in different ways that that's frightening. Particularly with respect to the Mediterranean, but then also the ancient Near East. So like tonight, but it's not limited to that, right, Pat? Like you're going to be bringing in lots of specialists to talk about their work, but trying to have like an archaeological focus on it. But tonight, I'm pretty excited because we're going to be talking about something that's sort of near and dear to my heart, and that is the archaeology that comes from the period in which the conquest of Canaan under Joshua was supposed to have taken place. And for those maybe that don't know, I've written a little bit about this. Certainly, it's not like my area of expertise, but I brought the scholars to everybody in the book. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about that.
Yeah, I am too. I think this show's going to be, it may be a little more lighthearted than like a serious academic show, but we're here to also engage with you guys. So the audience, keep your questions coming. They'll get tagged and we'll try to answer them. But really, we're here to talk about stuff that interests you. So when you have a question or comment, email us like, hey, can you guys do a show on this? This is a, historical topic. As long as it's not too really hard for us to research, we've got to find the one specialist who currently is 97 living in Turkey to get the information from. We'll try to do that for you. And I'm hoping that this show will be something that grows over time and you can get a lot of different topics and ask a lot of questions and get some good information from it. But tonight's topic is definitely outlined in a particular book I read. I think there's a book that has a chapter kind of dedicated to the archaeology of the Conquest. You may have heard of it. It's called the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1. Oh,
that's true. That's true. That's actually in 2, which is this guy.
2. Well, I read both.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Damn it, Bobby.
Well, to be fair, I read that in a PDF over the summer.
That's right. That's how we get down.
Yeah. So everybody, let's go ahead and get started and talk about the conquest of Canaan.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about atheists and agnostic and skeptic discussions online is that there's this, and we saw it last night with He Who Shall Not Be Named. There's always this posturing of prove that what it says in the Hebrew Bible, for example, is not true, right? The burden is on you because we start with the assumption that what it says in the Hebrew Bible, what it says in the Old Testament is accurate, right? And so you then, as the skeptic or the atheist, or you have to disprove what we assume to be true, whatever that means, depending on one's interpretation of the text. So, for example, if you're have a more fundamentalist approach to the text, you're going to say, okay, well, here we are with Adam and Eve and the Tower of Babel, and here's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so you get to things like the Exodus or the Conquest, and these are things that definitely happen just as a biblical text describe. And so, if you're discussing something with someone who has a more fundamentalist evangelical approach, well, then the burden is going to be shifted onto you by that person, generally speaking, to disprove what they know to be the inspired, inerrant Word of God. And because all they really need is a possibility. And for those of you that grew up fundamentalist evangelical, like I did, what I'm talking about, right? All you need is the possibility of it to be true. And so one of the things that I try to do in these atheist handbooks is to present some of these arguments, assuming that you're going to have to argue it from that position, right? So we're saying, okay, are you going to be able to prove like mathematically or have some deductive proof or something? No, because it's history, right? It's the past. We don't really have that sort of stuff normally. But if you can come at a topic and say, look at the preponderance of evidence, look at what all the scholars are saying about this. This is incredibly problematic for your position. Oftentimes, that is sufficient to get somebody thinking. And I think that one of those things that you can talk about is the conquest of Canaan, as described in the book of Joshua. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And I don't want to hog the microphone. So
you're not. So I always like to use this example when I'm talking on this subject. Again, history is kind of my thing, not biblical studies, but I often get asked, like, well, Pat, how would you compare? Well, everybody knows about Troy. It's been now substantiated. There was a place called Troy, but a couple hundred years ago, Troy was considered to be completely mythical because of the accounts contained within it. It seemed mythical. It seemed it would have been a really hard parsing of a cultural tradition passed orally and then ultimately ending up in the Homeric epic, right? But there were a few historians who said, well, maybe there's some source behind it. But until they confirmed a thing in the text, they did not consider the text reliable. It's kind of what we do with historical narratives. Like, we see the book, but does the book pertain, does this account in history, particularly those that are literary devices? That's the other thing too.
Yeah.
A hard academic ancient history is, and when I say history, that's a little loose term, and we'll have to define that over the course of the show. But like when we look at Herodotus, we don't believe everything in Herodotus. Is there a battle site at this site where there's the commemorated stone? Okay, that seems to be historically accurate. So the account around it may have some veracity to it. But Troy was just to believe a mythical thing. And they're saying, well, we found some indications here. Mycenae exists. It's mentioned by name. We may have actually figured out there was an Agamemnon. Let's go ahead and look into these things. And ultimately, archaeology confirmed that there are some parts of the Iliad that appear to be historically accurate, some form of culturally preserved memory that was passed down over several centuries. But that's not where you should start. No one should pick up a copy of the Iliad and go, this thing is true from cover to cover because we found some things inside it that back it up. That's no different than the burden placed on any piece of ancient literature, except the Old and New Testament.
Yeah.
Like they get a special category of acceptance that no one else in academia would approach any other ancient text from. Again, all these texts are making very similar claims. Some of it's mythological, some of it's ethnographic, some of it's historical, but you get special dispensation, and I use that phrase for a reason, when it comes to the Old Testament and New Testament corpus. Now, what's really funny is there's a lot of really important historical documents that didn't make the canon either. So like as a historian, Maccabees is a more important book for me for the period I study than some of the other texts that actually made it into the Old Testament. But I'm allowed to approach that in very critical scholarship. Don't have to worry about, even though it's claiming divine inspiration, because it didn't make the canonical cut. So you just have to understand the theological bias towards the Old Testament and the New Testament as corpi are really problematic.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I feel like the example that I always bring up that it seems to resonate with everybody is we don't struggle with this stuff with the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? Nobody goes, oh my gosh, like, all right, so there was a Gilgamesh. We have pretty good evidence of him in the 3rd millennium, and there's a city Uruk, and it had some big ass walls. Man, I'll bet there's a tunnel that the sun goes through. I'll bet that, and he actually raced the sun through it and got to the place where the jewels are hanging from the trees. You're like, no, what?
But he had a buddy too.
Yeah.
His buddy Inky. Because we're on first term names like that. Like me and Inky hung out too.
Yeah.
Like Inky dude, he's my dude.
Yeah.
Right. But we just call him E because we're like that.
But this is the issue, right? If you come to the text with the presupposition that, yes, this is the inspired and inerrant word of God, then there are certain things that follow. And so this is why I think something like the Conquest, the archaeology of the period where the Conquest or when the Conquest was supposed to have taken place, is actually really important. And so what I wanted to do tonight, if that's cool, Pat, is just to sort of walk through some of the sites and see does it match up with the biblical narrative? Is because many of these places, right, have been excavated pretty thoroughly. And what is it that scholars have found? Sometimes, maybe often, evangelical Christian scholars. And what did they have to say about it? So I thought that was a good thing, maybe to light this off with.
Bite our teeth on, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So the idea here is, if you read through the narrative in Numbers and Deuteronomy, in particular the book of Joshua, you see the Israelites are coming up out of Egypt. They wander in the desert, around Kadesh Barnea for about 38, 40 years. And then after that generation dies out, God gives the command, all right, head on up. We're going to take the land. And on the way up, they conquer several cities. And then when they cross over the Jordan River into Canaan proper, into Cisjordan, then they obviously, take many other cities according to the biblical narrative. And Eric Klein, who is a brilliant historian and archaeologist, wrote a book called 1177. And if anybody's read it, I mean, he's just a brilliant scholar. But he wrote a book earlier, I think around 2008, 2009. I'm probably going to get the title wrong, but it's like From Eden to Exile. But what he does is he looks at several narrative sections of the Hebrew Bible, of the Old Testament, and says, all right, how much can we say about these based on the archaeological record? And one of the things that he looks at is the conquest. And he came up with a methodology for how to utilize archaeology and to examine the conquest narrative. And what he says is he looks at 8 cities inside of Cisjordan and says, okay, these are said to have either been destroyed completely, like burned to the ground, or captured, completely, devastated, whatever. We should be able to see in the archaeological record evidence of this, right? We should be able to see evidence of a destruction. So maybe we should take a second, Pat, and being the resident archaeologist, sort of sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here, but explain what it is that means. Like, why should we be able to see a destruction in the strata?
Oh yeah. So again, layers. Oh, I'm going to cringe every time I hear that. So we have levels of deposition, right? So basically, archaeologists learn just enough geology to be dangerous. So for all the geologists in the audience, I'm going to use your words without your permission, and then you're going to say, but that's the archaeological use of that term. Right. Just fucking get over it. So we have strata, layers that we can see, depositions. And so archaeologists can go, okay, if something happened, what would be the reasonable deposits or contextual analysis we can make? So let's say city was we're going to bore you already, but if city existed and city was burnt to the ground,
yep,
and then city was built over it, when we dug down under current city, we should find a burn layer, basically a heavy area of carbonization. What appeared to have been houses that were knocked down, collapsed. There's a lot of things we'll see, but it should appear within a context that would give us some indication that either partial or full destruction of something occurred, which is different than abandonment. Abandonment, we wouldn't have what would appear to be interpreted in this context as a slow, steady decline of a city, town, or village over time. So again, depending on where we find stuff, how we find stuff, the context it's found in, and kind of maybe the jumbling of it. Because sometimes you'll go, well, it seems like this part of the city was abandoned after an attack, but this part of the city wasn't destroyed during that attack, and it seems like it was still populated. That's also detectable. So degrees of destruction can be determined as well. And then also, what does rebuilding look like? Well, depending on which cultural group we're talking about, but in general terms, let's smooth everything out, move away the big rocks. But ancient peoples weren't like modern people. They didn't have bulldozers. So typically what they do is when house collapsed because it was attacked and burnt to the ground, They just stomped on it real hard, took out the big bits that would have make it not flat for the new foundation, and then they built up from there. So the deposition in antiquity is different than modernity, where we dig foundations, drop concrete. Although the Romans and other people did that, I don't want to get and argue with them. But there are fields of engineering that would examine that, but we would detect that as well in the archaeological and historical record. Well, archaeological record. So it's not hard to actually do this when you take your time, you're methodological in your approach, and open to understanding that you build upon the observable criteria rather than just engaging in random, we call it a WAG. No wild ass guesses allowed in archaeology. Right. It's a methodologically slow and deliberate process.
And just so it's clear, like to back up for the non-archaeologists even more, and I count myself among that crowd, because although I've excavated and taken a lot of courses, I'm not an archaeologist, as Pat will tell you very quickly. But when archaeologists go out, they dig down, right? That's the direction that they go. So oftentimes, like out in Mesopotamia, you have these mounds, these tells. They're just, do you see what I'm doing here? This is really awesome.
Well, it's a descriptive show. The best graphics available.
But there, a city will often build, start an established city on top of a piece of higher ground, right?
Right.
And then again, so let's say they build the first city up. Often in Mesopotamia, it's made out of mud brick. And well, that stuff only lasts about 50 years. And so they either have to tear down the old buildings and put up new. Well, when you tear it down, it compacts down and into these strata, right? These layers that I like to call them, and then you build a new city on top of that. And then 50 years later, so you get another. So what ends up happening is you start getting these things stacked up on top of each other, and the mound gets bigger and bigger. So then if an archaeologist goes and digs down, right? And when you dig down, you create this, like you go down in the nicely cut hole. Of course, back in like the 20s, they didn't cut them nicely. But it terrified me, just as a side note, when I saw that, who was it? Was it Langdon, I think, at the city of Kish, dug a 5 meter by 5 meter by the length of the tell trench. And that was his context.
To be fair, at least he dug it straight. Yeah, I've seen some where the old archaeologists would literally snake it, because they were hitting things that that dirt's really hard and I want to keep going, so we're going to go this way.
But when you dig down and then you go down inside that hole, if you look at the wall, they call that a bulk. You look at the wall, there's these different layers, right? These different strata, these occupation layers, occupation strata. So that's what Pat's talking about. So here in this context, archaeologists are able to look at these different strata and say, based on, again, as Pat's saying, meticulous methodological approach, they can say, okay, this occupation layer or context dates to this, this period or whatever, this general time. And there are ways that they do that. We won't go into that here. But so what we're looking at is, according to the biblical account, most everybody, certainly the consensus position, is that the 13th century is the time that we should, if we're looking for like an Exodus and a conquest, that's when we should be looking for it. There are people that hold, obviously more fundamentalist people would hold to like a traditional date, which would be in the 15th century. But in either case, it's in the late Bronze Age, right? The second half of the second millennium BCE down to about 1200. It's supposed to be like sometime between 1500 and 1200, right?
And you're being really nice, but okay.
Yes, I am. But so if we're going to try to examine the biblical record, and when I say that, what I mean is taking a fundamentalist evangelical approach to the biblical text and saying, well, it says it, that means it happened that way. Then what we should be able to do is dig down in these cities, on these mounds, on these tells, and say, okay, here are the late Bronze Age remains. We should see destructions on the site. We should see destruction. And for example, in a place like Jericho, since everybody's familiar with it, we should see big, like massive walls that are falling down flat, right? That's what we should see. We should see destruction and massive walls falling down. So what Eric Klein did, and this is the methodology that I utilized in my chapter.
I love Eric Klein. He's my
he's
I'm
awesome.
Fanboying. He's like one of the top. Just so you guys know, Eric Klein's like one of the top 10 archaeologists in the world.
and like he's such a nice guy. Anyway, in case anybody's interested, he read through and endorsed this volume. If you can see it there, Eric Klein.
That was a big flex right there. I don't think
I almost fell out of my chair when he wrote back, because it was like Megan knows him, and I mean I know him now, but like Megan knows him, and she was like, "Hey, what do you think about reading this?" And anyway, I was really excited. So, but what we want to do is we want to look at these cities that are supposed to have been destroyed in the late Bronze Age and say, okay, what do we see here? What did archaeologists find? And we need two things. We need occupation at the site. We need people that live there, like there was an actual active city, because that's what the narrative shows us that it wants. And then we need a destruction, right? Now, there are other things that we would like to see, right? So if you're at Jericho, you want a big ass wall, right? You want fortifications. But if we can just have significant occupation and a destruction in the period, that goes a long way to saying, yeah, the biblical narrative is kind of getting it right. So in the book, and we won't talk about all of them, obviously that would be too much, but I look at 3 sites outside of Canaan proper, outside of Cisjordan. The site in the Negev, the site of Arad, and then the 2 sites, Heshbon and Dibon, in the Transjordan. And then after Joshua and the Israelites are supposed to have crossed over, I look at Jericho, Lachish, and Hatzor. And again, it's just asking those 2 questions. Is there a city there to be destroyed, and do we see it destroyed?
Right. And one of the things about occupation is it's not perfect science, but what archaeologists would do during this systematic excavation of the site is we'd be doing analysis of all the pottery. Where are these people trading with? Where are their goods coming in from? But part of that also tells us how much goods are coming in, how much goods are being locally produced. So you can actually get an estimate, it's never perfect, of about how many people live there. So it's not just did people live there, how densely was it populated? What regions of this city, town, or whatever were the occupied areas? Did they have drain systems? Did they, the longer a city's in a place, the more cool stuff they make. So a recently constructed city is going to have less cool things because it takes time for infrastructure. Just like if you're an American taxpayer, you understand infrastructure needs to be replaced. But the issue is like how much building went into this village, town, or city. And that gives us also some adjustment on how long it's been around and how many people were living there.
Yeah, that's right. So if you go to, like, I think what people need to understand, and Pat, obviously this is your thing, but I remember somebody asked, well, how significant would it be that pottery sherds are not actually there? Yeah, pretty significant, right? Like you can go to these sites and kind of take your foot and move it around on the top, and there's pottery.
I would ask, I use this because I always, you have students who've never been on a dig before. And I try to explain to them that in some places where I actually am an active excavator, that like we don't collect sherds that are smaller than a quarter, because then we would literally all day just be shorting sherds. And so I said, if it's smaller than a quarter, ignore it. And then they get their first shovel full of dirt and they're like, oh my gosh, there's like 30 sherds in this shovel. I'm like, yeah, because that's where we're digging. And other places where I dig, like today, I'm getting ready to go dig in the Pacific Northwest. We may dig literally 100 test holes, and we may find 1 or 2 lithic items. So you also have to know the density of the area of what you're looking for. But in a region like the Levant, when Josh tells you, and by the way, don't say shard because that'll make my ears bleed. It's sherd.
Yep.
You get glass shards, you get pottery sherds. But the important thing, like when we look at this, the density of these items tell us how there's a lot of this basically refuse. The great thing about ceramics, and I may say terracotta because I study Roman stuff too much, but when we look at ceramics and materials, they don't go away unless you pulverize your clay pot, which is a good example. It'll always be around. Do this experiment, because I do it with my students. Go up, throw a clay pot across your yard in your parking lot. It breaks. Pick up every piece. First of all, that's a challenge in of itself when you're talking about the little bits, because we can analyze the little bits. Then get painter's tape and put it back together, because that's reconstruction of what an archaeological site would do. That's not so hard when it's only one pot. I'm going to give you this. This is what we do in class. Get 3 pots of different sizes, put them in a grocery bag, tie a knot on it, throw it across your yard. Now you have all the pieces, and that's not a guarantee. But then take that same painter's tape and assemble all 3. It will amaze you how hard and difficult it is. But there's so much evidence there. The soil that it came out of, the density of it, that'll tell us how thick the vessel was. Just one little sherd, we can reconstruct sometimes the entire ceramic item. So why are these people not importing olive oil? Why does there appear to be no olive oil production? Like, these are all questions we answer, and it takes a lot of time. But when Josh tells you there's going to be a lot of information coming out of the ground, there literally is going to be a lot of information.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if you dig down, and I know this is just sort of devolving into a discussion about basic archaeology, but I think that's good. Like, if you come down on a wall, right, and this is a residential area, you think it's a residential wall, and you start separating out, okay, this pottery came from on this side of the wall, and this pottery came on this side. And why do you do that? Well, if you're digging down on this side and you find a bunch of cooking pots, right, or sherds that are from cooking cookware, then you say, okay, this might be the cooking area, right? This is the room that cooking is done. And that's important information to, it needs to be analyzed and documented. So
something else too with walls. Walls typically stand up. If walls are allowed to fall from time, basically abandonment, they tend to fall equally on both sides over the course of their run. One section may collapse this way, one section this way, but in general, when you have a long wall, they'll do a little bit of this on each side and then kind of come down from the top. So that would tell us that's a sign of abandonment. It's not a guarantee. You got to take a lot of their evidence. When forcibly removed, walls are physically manipulated. So when you destroy something, typically soldiers stand on one side and push it all to the other when they're destroying a layer. So you're destroying a wall and forming that deposition layer. So when you push that over, like, manual destruction of something looks very different than what would happen just because of what side the stones end up on. They're not going to destroy the walls into the town if they're still going to inhabit it, because, hey, we can still use those places. But if they burn it to the ground, then it may look different, but then we have a complete destruction layer. But typically that's not what happened, by the way. A lot of times when cities were conquered, it was just tear down their walls and then let them do business as normal, paying us more taxes.
Yeah. So, okay, with all of that sort of in mind, when we go to, I'll just talk about maybe the sites, one of the sites or two of the sites in the Negev and in Transjordan. So with the city of Arad, what archaeologists found is that you have in the 3rd millennium, right? So 3000 to 2000 BCE, you have significant occupation. Right? There are people living there, big walls, all this shit.
A lot of people.
Yeah. And that's pretty typical around that area of the Levant, right? There's just in the 3rd millennium, there's a lot of stuff. Even the first half of the 2nd millennium, the Middle Bronze Age, there's often quite a bit. Again, not my area of expertise, but just, But with the city of Arad, at the end of the 3rd millennium, there's I think it's a destruction. I can't remember. But the site no longer is occupied, and it doesn't get reoccupied, I think, until Iron 1. So very end of the 2nd millennium. But what the point is that the site is abandoned completely during the late Bronze Age. There's no city there to be destroyed, right? And that's true of Arad, Heshbon, and Dibon. All 3 that are in either the Negev or Transjordan, those 3 sites that are said to have been destroyed in the biblical narrative. There's nobody there to destroy. And again, go into all the detail in the book, whatever. But like that's a huge thing because it's incredibly problematic. If basically what they say is if the Israelites had shown up in the late Bronze Age to conquer the site of Arad or the site of Heshbon or whatever, there wouldn't have been anybody there, right? There's no city. There's no city to destroy, which is obviously incredibly problematic for the narrative.
So I know the answer, but so we don't see anything until after roughly 1000 BCE at these sites for reoccupation, right? There's not only 2 of them get reoccupied. I don't remember. It's your book.
Again, it's trying to pull it from memory, but like Arad, I think gets reoccupied at the very end of the second millennium, so like around late 12th century, early 11th, I think.
But how? But it's not a big city, thriving
right,
city.
That's
again. Right. And this is something else. The city was once really big.
Yeah.
Then everybody goes away, and then later, even when the city comes back, it's never the former glory. It will be moving forward, but at the time, for the next few hundred years, it's just kind of getting its feet back, speaking architecturally, right? So it's really not till about 900 or 800 that this place is back on the map, where you can go, that's an important place. But that's really problematic. So you either have to bracket the destruction in that region. If you want to give it to the ancient Hebrews coming during the conquest period, you have to say, well, the Hebrews actually did it at 2000 BCE or 1900 BCE, right? Because there is a destruction layer. Or they had to wait until they reformed the city to be actually something worth attacking, because they could have just bypassed the village or the small settlement that it was. And then, but wait a minute, there's no destruction layer that's contemporaneous during that 300-year reestablishment anyway. So now you're saying there's no destruction later. So the only option that you have as an apologist to say, well, actually, the conquest happened way earlier than the biblical narrative. So you have to admit that the biblical narrative's wrong, but it's not substantiated, because now it just throws off your whole narrative. But what do? Well, maybe we can say that the archaeology, we take the most favorable interpretation of the archaeology, because some archaeologist has 2 beers in a bar and says, hey, everybody's saying that destruction happened between 2000 and 1900, maybe 1850, and they're massaging it. But is there anybody willing to say 1600? And there's one drunk guy who hasn't written a book in 30 years. He goes, yeah, I don't have a problem with it being 1600. They quote him, and that becomes the new established. But it's not what the investigative team, the people that are working on the site that actually know it. It's some person who goes, well, I read that site report. I don't like that archaeologist anyway that's in charge of that. And I think his methodology is flawed, so I would put it earlier. Were you on site? Did you physically inspect it? Did you actually go through the material culture? No. It's kind of like a doctor phoning in your surgery.
Yes. Yeah. And so one of the things that I think is really important to recognize about all this is when you hear certain apologists making these sorts of assessments of archaeological sites. For example, I did a video with Apologia a couple months ago. I don't remember. But we were analyzing Sean McDowell talking to, what in the world is his name? Oh, that's terrible. I can't remember the archaeologist's name. He and like Bryant Wood are on the same plane. Titus Kennedy. Thank you. Titus Kennedy. And the analysis that he was making, well, I think that Jericho has, the conquest happens at the end of the 15th century. And when you have those sorts of positions, you're doing that if you're more of a fundamentalist evangelical. You're doing that because places in the biblical text give you time frames, right? So when it comes to the Exodus, for example, if you go to 1 Kings 6:1, right, it talks about 480 years before Solomon, this particular year of Solomon. And so, if that's around like 970, then you go back, and now you've got a time frame, right, middle of the 15th century or something, and then 40 years wandering. That puts you, right around the end of the 15th century. The same thing in the book of Judges. Jephthah has a statement about around 1100. Roughly it's 300 years before that. This is supposed to have taken place around the conquest. And so, again, the point is that the biblical narrative gives you these time frames, which is why the traditional date was right around 1447, and then 1407 for the conquest. Archaeology moved that date very far forward. And so if you read people who are, I think, much more in tune with the archaeology, I certainly don't agree with them, but they're much more in tune with the archaeology. Somebody like James Hoffmeyer, right, or Kenneth Kitchen, they're going to say, actually, those biblical dates, that's what they say, but we're going to have to like re-examine this stuff because the archaeology certainly does not hold in any way with the 15th century, the traditional date. Sorry, Pat, go ahead.
And you'll notice there's a very interesting apologetic that goes on at this point. They go, well, remember that 300 years may have been a literary device because they have to narrow that number.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is they're still not interpreting the archaeology right. But
yes.
they're saying, well, the archaeologists say, well, we're just going to go earlier. Yeah. So they didn't mean 40 years. I've actually heard this argument. 40 years becomes 4. 300 becomes 30. Well, everybody in the ancient world multiplied by 10, right? Like when this army was destroyed, we don't think Caesar killed 60,000 people. We think Caesar maybe killed 6,000 because verbosity was an issue in ancient texts, by the way, very common.
Oh yeah, sure.
But so what they do is they go, but what the first attack is, the apologist is actually saying we can't trust the text, but we still want to prove it happened.
Yeah.
And think about that argument. It's really, it's like, having your cake and eat it too.
A really clear example of this, I think, is something like Exodus 12:37, right? Where it's talking about the Exodus from Egypt, and it says that 600,000 fighting men, like 20 years old and up. These are that many people left, that many Israelites left. And so when you include women and children in that, estimates are between 2 and 3 million people. Well, up until recently, I don't know, maybe the past 50 years or so, nobody should quote me on that. But roughly, it was like, wait a second, 50, more recently it's been, wait a second. We know that estimates for New Kingdom Egypt were only 3 million. Like there's only 3 million in all of Egypt during that period. So you can't have the entire population of Egypt walking out, right?
A lot of good Egyptologists have, like when people make this argument, they go, no, it could happen. Egypt, look at how many people are in Egypt today. The agricultural system, we can measure the farms. We know where they are. We know how much grain Egypt could produce given their traditional farming system. Like the reason their population capped at about 3 million during the height of their population was because that's as much food as they could produce. But if over half those people are Hebrew slaves, there's no way Egypt could have fed those people. It's I don't want to say it's physically impossible, but it was agriculturally impossible for this massive population of Hebrew slaves to exist. But then but when you tell someone that, they're like, prove it. And then you have to show them 19 volumes of agricultural archaeological survey of the region, and they will not read it. So what's the point?
Yeah. And I think you said it pretty well, right? I don't have time to cram a 2-year course down your throat. Like that's really where we're at. And so like somebody like James Hoffmeyer, Kenneth Kitchen would say, well, okay, now that we know this data, now that we know that there couldn't have been 2 or 3 million people that left, we must be misunderstanding the word 1,000 in Exodus 12:37, right? It's the Hebrew word Aleph. And so it must not mean 1,000. And so they go to other places in the Hebrew Bible where Aleph has like more of a military unit idea. And they say that must be what it means. It's like a much smaller, now we've got a much, much smaller group of people. But that creates tremendous problems in the rest of the narrative. And I talk about them I've got a chapter on the Exodus as well in volume 2. So I talk about it there. But this is the sort of apologetic reasoning that you get, right? And I understand it. I get it. If you're going to hold still to like the inspiration view of the text, you got to do something, right? And so these sorts of things happen in the archaeological record as well. So when you move, and Pat, just stop me if you ever, but when you move into Cisjordan and you look at the city of Jericho, right, the big one that everybody knows, what you find in the archaeological record is, and there are teams like still working there. There's a Italian-Palestinian team that's at least working at Jericho now. At least up till 2015, but I think it was even more recently than that. But Lorenzo Negro is one of the main archaeologists up there, and you know what they've learned since somebody like Garstang went in there in the 30s and excavated, and then Kathleen Kenyon came with better methods and reanalyzed his work and made some serious and proper corrections. And then somebody like PavlD came and looked at it again, specifically for the late Bronze Age. Like, there's a lot of work that's been done at Jericho for obvious reasons, because it's such an important site for the biblical text. And what they found is that Jericho is a massive site, right? It goes back to what, like 10,000 BCE or something. It's old.
It's one of those, what we call early transition sites. So, we talk about various places where we see the first settlements, like a place where, man, it's not like we go back to the first settlement formations and we put like this 2,000-year window, right? Basically and I don't want to argue with people about this because you'll find different books say different things, but somewhere around 9,000, 8,000 BCE, we get the first settlement formations where we start seeing communal settlement. Sometimes some people push that back to 9,500. It really doesn't matter for the purpose of this illustration, but we get within this 2,000-year window the first settlements, and there are not a lot of them. Well, Jericho's one of them. Mm-hmm. It's towards the late part of that 2,000-year early window, but that puts Jericho somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 BCE, where people started building huts there and wanting to live. Like people wanted this site for a long time, and there's lots of reasons. There's a field of archaeology known as landscape archaeology, where they go out and study not just what it looks like today, but why would ancient people want to live there? You have specialists that go out and look at the soil samples going, wow, at this time period, a long time ago, this soil was extremely rich. This was their water systems. This is, we can map their rivers. So it's a complex thing, but Jericho was it was almost like a paradise. Like it was a great place to live. It was all that in a bag of chips if you live there.
Yeah. But what we see as you start to come, down into our time period, you've got significant occupation with massive city walls, both in the 3rd millennium, and there's a destruction. Then it gets rebuilt several times during the Middle Bronze Age, so the first half of the 2nd millennium BCE. And the walls get like twice the size. There's a lot of fortifications going on there. But then when you get into the late Bronze Age, there's just not a lot there. Now, it's not like Arad and Heshbone and Dibone where there's just no occupation. There is some. There's a architectural structure called the Middle Building, and that dates to at least the first part of the late Bronze Age. But it's small, and it seems like occupation is sort of limited to that. And then there are arguments that it's abandoned right around 1275. So, like, this is really problematic for sort of the consensus date for the Exodus, if we're trying to find match this up historically, Conquest, match it up historically. It's just really problematic for that. But the reason that's or what ends up happening here is that there's some evidence of erosion at the site. And so what apologists will posit, or some evangelicals will posit, is, well, maybe all the remains that we're looking for, all the destruction layers, the walls, all that stuff, it all just got eroded away. And so somebody like PavlD entertained that notion, right, and looked at it, and he concluded, again, I talk about it in the book, but he concluded we would expect to see something, right, pushed up against a wall or some of the remains would be there, and we just don't see much of anything outside of that area around the middle building. And so this is, obviously incredibly problematic, but it fits very well with what we know of sites during this period. And I'll shut up after this, but during this period, during the late Bronze Age, Canaan is a part. It's like it's controlled. It's a province of Egypt, right? So they're not letting them have these massive fortifications during this. They're just not doing that, right? Because they have Egyptian officials there, and this is, and again, Egypt's not my area of specialization, so nobody come at me with that. But I'll just direct you to the people that do have that specialization. By the way, as an aside, on the 17th, on Heathen Queen's channel, and it's going to be co-hosted by Megan, there's a panel discussion on the Exodus with Mark Lucher, brilliant Hebrew Bible specialist, Kara Cooney, brilliant Egyptologist, and they're bringing me along, I think, maybe just to introduce people. I don't know, but I'll be there as well. But it should be good. So on the 17th September, look for that. We're going to talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to add, and I'm going to have to dip out for a second because I have someone knocking on my door and they don't realize what I'm doing. Real quick, the other thing too is one thing that is really important for people to understand, like at Jericho and a lot of other places, is some of the analysis shows that it may have been overworked. Like the people grew and the system, the surrounding countryside and agriculture couldn't support the population work. They basically wore the place out. And so there was a period of decline. Now that could have been a lot of different things. Water could have gone in decline. The Bronze Age collapse may not have been a thing that happened overnight, like some people used to envision. It may have been systemic, long periods of drought. And so when populations get pressed, the archaeological record reflects that. As people stop eating, they stop making the pottery to hold their food, water, and other essentials. And we see that at Jericho. They're just not making as much stuff over time, which means less and less people are living there. Now, exactly how we interpret that, was it a systems failure of the agricultural system, or were people just finding a better place to live? Were the Egyptians forcibly displacing these people because they didn't want them to have a big body of people that could grab a bunch of torches and pitchforks and overthrow them? There's a lot of possible answers, and not any of them are mutually exclusive to each other either. Right. So I'll be back in 1 minute.
Yeah. So I think, again, I won't go through every city. I'll maybe talk about one more, and the other, really big one besides Hatzor, because Hatzor is such an important site, and it's really one of like 2 or 3 that fits reasonably well with the biblical narrative out of like 31, I think. Which is not, it's not a good record. 2 or 3 out of 31 is not very good. But the site of I is, and if you grew up fundamentalist evangelical, you may have pronounced that AI. I don't know, Jena, did you ever?
That sounds more aligned to, yeah.
That's what I did, Jericho and AI. But the city of I it's called Et Tel, which just means like a ruin mound, and that's what I means, like ruin. And I was very similar to sites that are outside of Canaan that we talked about. So Rod, Heshbon, Dibon. It was one where in the 3rd millennium, big deal. And I think around 2400, I'd have to go back and look at the date, but around 2400, the site was either destroyed or abandoned. I can't remember, but it just sat in ruins. And so during the entirety of through the late Bronze Age, the period when Israel's supposed to come and conquer it, it's just abandoned. It's an abandoned site. And so in the same way that, like more fundamentalist evangelical or just regular evangelical scholars dealt with something like Jericho, where they said, maybe erosion is, because they recognized the problem with the archaeology.
Sure.
And so they say, well, maybe erosion. Well, with the site of I, one of the things that they say is maybe we've just misidentified the site. Maybe this mound that we're digging at, this city that we're digging at, maybe this wasn't actually I. Maybe it's this site that's like 2 miles up the road. Maybe that's biblical I. But again, the reason that they're postulating these things is because the archaeology doesn't work, right? The archaeology doesn't match. And I guess, you know, if we looked at all those sites and all of those sites like matched, we got a late Bronze Age, end of the 13th century, there's a destruction layer, clear big walls, whatever, and site after site and this destruction all at the same time or roughly at the same time, like, fine, you get to the site of I and it doesn't work, and you're like, okay, like I would entertain that. Right? Maybe we've misidentified because look, all the other ones match up. This one might be misidentified. But it's not that, right? None of them, not none of them, but only a couple of them work. And so when it matches all the other ones that don't work, it's like, why would we postulate this? Is it just because you need there to be a destruction here? In that case, as I say, it's starting with your conclusion and backing into the data, and we can't do it that way. Only
counting the hits and ignoring the misses. Like,
yeah. What is that? Confirmation bias? I can't remember.
Something like that.
So
I one of my big, since we're talking about this, and the Conquest is really important from an archaeological point. There's a lot of really good archaeologists that work on this. Klein is just one, but like, and he's a Bronze Age specialist, by the way. So you want to know about the Bronze Age and you want to see any great book on it, you read Klein. Another guy's name is Finkelstein, right? Like this archaeologist kind of specializes in that exact region. He's one of the established experts. He's not exactly the most politically correct person when he talks, which that's another reason I love him. But Finkelstein he just wrote a book 2021 about this particular issue. And if you notice, there's an authoritative volume on the archaeology of the ancient Levant. Oh wait, I happen to have that book right here. The Oxford Handbook on the Archaeology of Levant. He also wrote one on the archaeology of the formation of the archaeology and history of the Pentateuch. Right, and he wrote that chapter, and he writes all these chapters on both the history and the archaeology of Israel. And in 2021, he basically wrote, I'm going to summarize it because it's actually a really cool paragraph if people want to read it. He said that basically it doesn't matter what we find. People don't want to believe it. He goes on to say that the archaeology disproves, not only causes us to have doubts, but disproves many of the things that are the formational constructs of both the state of Israel and then later, Jewish identity. He goes, but for the people that were assembling the corpus of the Old Testament, basically the Pentateuch and, in the pre and exilic and post-exilic period, it didn't matter. They were not worried about us 2,500 years later after they wrote it, coming back and fact-checking them. They were free to make up whatever they want because they were more worried about preserving and maintaining a cultural and ethnic identity than they were about lying. And he uses the term fabricating a historical narrative, basically creating mythology. Because the archaeology is basically showing, like, we can't even really, like there are apologetics beside, it's really hard to put the state of Israel as a united kingdom into the historical record for any long period of time. Like, we're relying on the biblical narrative to say, oh, we were a united kingdom. But what it's actually kind of showing is that for a long time, the northern kingdom of Israel was suppressing the southern kingdom of Judah. In the the archaeological record showing was this one's a lot more powerful than this one. And were they united? Well, I'm sure the subjective people of Judah wanted to say, yeah, we're on the same team. But Israel, the northern kingdom, may have never had that concept. They may have seen their southern neighbor as a vassal state for the entire existence of that kingdom. We don't know yet, but are we just going to trust the historical narrative that's in these texts that were formed hundreds of years after these events occurred, when the important information isn't what actually happened? Let's maintain this cultural identity in light of all of this new pressure, this new period of conquest, and this need to maintain a cultural identity. Now, I don't blame them for it. Creating mythologies like this were really important. And I'm using the word mythology because a lot of what is in the text is mythos. with some mix of cultural memory, which isn't like it's cultural memory, so it's history. Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't, and we can get on that later. But I just, yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to point out because, Pat was talking earlier about how clay pots and the fragments of clay pots get well preserved. Well, this is true of lots of things that are made out of clay. And something that is also, many things that are also made out of clay are cuneiform tablets. And this is something that Pat was talking about last night. There's a reason that we know so much about ancient Mesopotamian history. And it's because we have extant tablets, right? We have writing, the actual physical tablet, not a copy, the actual thing that goes back to like the end of the 4th millennium, right? So we have writing, and we have the thing that's written on. So when you're talking about the Hebrew Bible, you're talking about manuscripts that are copied much later, and of course they're still pretty early, right? Like for what we have in the biblical text, like the Qumran, and what we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, like 200 BCE is pretty good, right? But when you're talking about something like the Sargonic period, right, or the Ur III period, so things that are taking place in the second half of the 3rd millennium BCE, and you're talking about Naram Sin, or you're talking about Sargon, or you're talking about Shulgi, or any of these kings, it's not that we're reading 700 years later manuscripts about them, that we're reading administrative texts and royal inscriptions that were written in like contemporaneous, and lots of them. And so when you see something like Naram Sin this king Naram Sin has all these grandson of Sargon, has all these inscriptions about this massive battle that he fought, or series of battles that he fought. You can trust that a lot more. And you don't just trust it, even those that are contemporaneous. You don't just say, oh my God, well, I mean, it must have fought 9 battles in 1 year. Here we go, because it says it. I'm here to help, just when you slip into Ken Hovind like that, I don't know, it's probably not a good thing.
Too easy.
I think you need to see things. Yeah, we're gonna have to do a show where you do that.
The whole show.
But that's not how history works, right? So you don't take propagandistic texts and just slavishly say, well, it says it here and therefore it happened. But it's a lot more reliable. There's a lot more there to mine. Those data points are easier in many ways to lean on than something that's copied, as Pat was talking about, hundreds of years later. And so that's something critical to remember. And so when we talk about things like, hey, look, the flood story, we have the actual goddamn tablet, from just after 2000 BCE. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and so like I give another example. We have like stuff Caesar wrote or dictated to be written. It survived the historic record. We got the Gallic War, we got Caesar's Civil War texts. We still don't take everything Caesar wrote verbatim, right? We understand these texts are have propaganda value. Now, when Josh is talking about propaganda in the ancient world, basically I was once, I'm a young grad student, and hey, we always talk about propagandist texts. I'm a historian. What can I trust? And it was kind of, again, I love really old crotchety scholars who go, well, unless it's, and we're talking about Mesopotamia, unless it's about a ration of beer, food expedition, or some type of contract regarding you having to pay someone back, you have to worry about propaganda. Or prayers, things like that were state institutions. But even in the prayers, you have to worry about it because the kings get mentioned like in really flowery language, if the king's included, right? So if it's about a king, a queen, or anybody of royal dynastic blood, assume it's propaganda from the get-go. And he made this point. He goes, if I asked you to write your own autobiography, would you actually put all the dirty details in it, or would you make yourself sound better than you were? Understanding that no one's going to be able to fact check you in the future. I said, and that after that, I was like, I was, you have to approach everything with skepticism, because imagine you're the scribe that walks in with the big cuneiform tablet that calls the king a douchebag because it's accurate, right? Like, oh yeah, you're an asshole king. Well, that guy didn't write very much. It's hard to write with 2 stumps because they cut your hands off. Like the text had to be that way because the kings were seen as, in many ways, the king priest, right? With the reason we use the term, right? They were like also the heads of state that had religious connotation to them. They were great beings of themselves, like regular people and then the important people.
So if I may, do have a question, and we have tons of questions. Thank you all in the chat. I have quite a few saved, so thank you for being so active there. But in regards to that, when you have so many examples, manuscripts, or various things that you have to kind of make judgments on, research and all that, how do you determine which one's the most correct? Or is that a thing? Do you just bundle them all and say, okay, we have a story, we can just over time decipher what parts of it is true and what parts is more mythical or just kind of just fucking made up? But is there, is there just one cohesive method that either an archaeologist or historian or anyone can just use to determine like this particular manuscript, this particular evidence is the absolute truth of this particular history, story of an individual person or anything like that?
So there's an intersection in, again, I trained as a historian first and an archaeologist second. So I kind of came in. Historians like the written stuff. Archaeologists like the stuff they find in the ground. And there's this intersection between the text and the material culture. And that's actually, we call that study text and material culture. If you go to grad school and you're an archaeologist, you got to take like a year of it. Like, how can we use text? And basically you take the text as a kind of a general outline, right? And you start seeing, well, we'll look at the text and as you start verifying it, you can maybe start trusting its reliance in other places. For example, like if a text never gets anything right in this region, why bother using it when we're talking about this other region over here? But some scholar will go, well, let's see if it actually works over here. And typically, if you only have one text, you're stuck with one text. But there's other texts as well. You may have like a text that mentions the place, but not as much detail as the earlier text. So reaffirmation of something having happened in a place helps us too. But sometimes we don't ever get to ground truth the text. We don't actually go out and dig the archaeology. And you'll hear archaeologists say like that site's never been ground tested or ground truthed. Like, and that's an archaeologist saying a text says this happened there, but we never dug it. And just because you see a mound, not every mound means there was a city on top of it either. I mean, there's other reasons to these tells would exist. And so it's problematic for people to just want to say, well, it's in the book, and so it's there, or which books do we use to actually figure stuff out? Because it's a complex task. And usually what happens is the historians come to the archaeologists and say, hey, we think this might have happened here. Can you guys go dig it up for us? And then we dig it up, and then we go, it doesn't say what you think it says this. And they go, well, next city over should this happen. But then we go over and we find out that didn't happen. So it was reliable in this case and not reliable in that case. And so you take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and I think this is the neat thing about working in Mesopotamia. If there's anybody out there that's looking for a career in ancient Near Eastern studies, come over to Mesopotamia and we have cookies. We also have tablets. And so, we have this unbelievably large corpus of cuneiform tablets. I think last count it was something like 500,000. And those are of all different genres. Sorry, Pat, go ahead.
The active collection at the Met that you can actually, sorry, not the Met, the British Museum that they'll actually let you look at online is over 10,000 now. And those are almost complete pieces. Those aren't the little because they don't bother putting that online because you don't know what you're reading anyway. Like, like there are a lot of them out there. Like
if you Google Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, CDLI, you can look up thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of cuneiform tablets, pictures, high quality photos, everything. Oftentimes they'll have translations, transliterations. It's where it was found, who's written about it. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Digital scholarship is huge. But the nice thing about it, so like one of the things that we let me think of something like Belshazzar, right, in the book of Daniel. Belshazzar is said to have been the final king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and he was the one that was on the throne the night that it fell to Cyrus, right? Well, we know that that's not true. We know that that's not how that went down. How do we know that? Well, it's not this like straightforward, easy thing to figure out. So there are a couple things that you can look at. First of all, you can look at administrative texts, actual cuneiform tablets that we have that talk about certain rations being sent to certain places. And you can see where Belshazzar was, right? You can see that X amount of, supplies were sent to, this particular place. And that gives you an idea that Belshazzar is actually at commanding forces on the border. He's not... Nabonidus is back from his 10-year sort of, excursion, whatever you want to call it, out to Tamar, right? He's back. He's on the throne. And so there are certain texts that are more propagandistic. So if you're reading through royal inscriptions where the king says, hey, write down on that big, monument all the cool shit that I did during my reign or during this year, in Sargon's 8th campaign, he's talking about how he like single-handedly runs ahead of his army and like picks up his chariot and like busts through the top of a mountain. So, okay, so he didn't do that, right? But if you look at the administrative tablets that talk about, hey, there's this thing that they did where they went out to fight the Lulibians or whatever. Not the Lulibians. Fuck. Why am I forgetting?
You're the Assyriologist, bro. No.
It'll come back to me in a minute. But
gather your thoughts.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Pat.
I was just gonna say, to give you a chance to think about it. And the other thing too is those administrative records really help for the people that are reconstructing the text. Because I will tell you, like, again, I'm not a Mesopotamian specialist, but the Roman army, sometimes we go, how many fucking soldiers were here? And because you don't know, Caesar's like, oh, I have all these guys, big battle, I killed all these Celts. But let's look at the troop rations. Let's see how much food was going in to feed the army, because we know how much food each Roman soldier was roughly allowed to eat. Same thing, you can do the same thing with Mesopotamia. Let's look at the beer ration, grain ration, and other things that were going out for the defending or attacking armies that were your armies. And if those grain rations and beer rations and all the other important things are really small, the army wasn't as big as the text is going to say. But if we start seeing this is going to be the necessary food remember, these are sieges and these are long-term campaigns. Thousands and thousands of soldiers were supplied in the field. That doesn't even count what they pillaged from the countryside, foraged. That's just the minimum amount of food they were going to need in case they got cut off or things happened. So when the administrative texts can really shed a lot of light on the other polemical, more descriptive, more narrative texts as well.
Urartu. It's Urartu is what I was thinking of.
Thank you. I'm glad you remembered. Well, gentlemen, very lively people in the chat. So we have quite a few super chats. And since they're super chats, they take priority. And since I'm not Oz, I don't have a little mixer to play the song. So my bad. I wish I did. I just don't have it. Maybe later. All right. Thank you, Constellation Pegasus, 1999. A little off topic, but why does the church get away saying the earth and man is 6,000 years old? It's like how apologists have no other course to ignore archaeology, around the Exodus.
Actually, I probably have somebody that could address this. I can go get him if you want.
Okay. Yes.
Just hang on a second.
Sure.
All right.
And we do have quite a deep...
It's good to be back here. I understand that we're talking about things that are in the Bible. Okay, and of course you're a bunch of atheists, so you don't really understand these things. You don't have the Holy Spirit. Okay, but there was a message in a doctor Josh's DMs by Heathen Queen. She probably is a heathen, right? And said wanted me to come and give you an answer. So here we are. I think constellation of Pegasus. Of course, we know that there were no Pegasus. Pegasi is. Okay. In the biblical, of course, we know in the Bible there are unicorns, but okay. But the Earth is 6,000 years old. That's when there was a worldwide flood. And you can't just prove that because you guys believe in evolution. Okay, and water rains down on otters. Okay, so I'm here to help. Now, what else you got for me?
I wish I could ban you, but I forget you guys live together.
Yeah, well, I mean, Josh is, he likes me being here, right? Because, I'm here to help. And that's what I do with him, is I help. I come on and answer these questions you atheists have, because that's what I do. I whack you off, okay? I whack off atheists. And that godless engineer, he always likes to talk about those penises. And you guys are probably thinking something crazy about that too now, 14-foot whale penises. Well, certainly I don't think about those things. Hey,
Mr. Hogan,
all right, fine.
Family show. Okay.
Josh wants to come back, and I don't have time for all you people. You atheists, I see you in hell. Okay.
Yep, got it. Get the fuck out.
And my answer would be, again, as awesome as that is the retrograding of Scripture is more important. Young Earth creationism is more important testament of faith than reality, and that's important to understand. Like, you have to twist yourself in an intellectual knot to think that the world is 7,000 years old. There was a comment in the chat I'm going to address. You would rather believe in the stories of Alexander than in the biblical narrative of the text. No. I'm a critical scholar. I don't believe that Alexander Great was a divine being. I believe that a lot of the depictions of Alexander Great in history were actually much greater than he was in life. A lot of the things attributed to what he did may never have actually happened. But the other thing that the biblical narrative doesn't have is a lot of people that Alexander was kicking their ass were writing about Alexander kicking their ass. That's something people forget. Yes, there's a lot of propaganda even among those conquered people, but what happens in a lot of those places is, as Alexander comes in, they saw Alexander the Great as a liberator culturally, because they had been under Persian suppression. So the Egyptians, Alexander the Great was, even though he was Greek, he was an awesome guy. And they declared him pharaoh. Whether or not he coached him with a lot of money and said, "Hey, I'm a great guy, promote me." But no historian approached the text goes, "Yeah, everything Arian wrote is 100% correct," and we take it. No, we've actually detected things even in that account that appeared not to have happened the way the text appears to describe it. So no, you're absolutely wrong. It's not about belief; it's about verification.
All right, fair enough. Super chat from Nicholas Lamar Shooter. I never said your middle name before, but anyway, $5. Thank you, Nick. I'm an atheist. Can anyone recommend a good book of the Old Testament? The Bible?
I can recommend.
Right? The Bible has the Old Testament. No.
Given Mr. Soder's ability to afford $500 suit jackets, I'm going to recommend 3. The first one is the Oxford Handbook to the Pentateuch. The second, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 1, and Atheist Handbook to the Testament, Volume 2. And I actually do that because there's nothing better than holding up Josh's book next to another really crisp academic book and going, wow, they agree.
This is see, you guys might think that's funny, but this is the reason that I write the way that I do. I'm scared, right? I don't like being wrong. So I'm going to make sure that what I'm saying agrees with consensus scholarship as much as humanly possible. It's fear that drives me. You know what I mean?
Well, damn good for you. And you better fucking buy his books. That's all I got to say. And one more super chat, Heathen Queen, just because I love you. And you did super chat, so you rightfully deserve this. Unmod me. I'll never stop muting Terry's bigoted ass. I mean, fair. I love you.
We love our Heathen Queen.
We do. All right. Well, let me scroll back up because we had questions from earlier on. This one's from Aunt Jur. Pat mentioned doing a dig in the PNW soon. Whereabouts in the PNW?
Well, I'm doing several. So I'll be out in the area near Yakima. I will be back out in Spokane and I will be up in the area east of Port Angeles. So what I do is I do a lot of what's known as preliminary surveys. I go out and dig shovel test probes. I survey a site to see if there's what's the background density of these sites. What would we expect if we were doing a larger excavation? So this is all really preliminary. Some of it's commercial contracting, it's cultural resource management. But yeah, I'm doing quite a bit of stuff. Sometimes I can take people with me because my company's cool and because they're generally cool, but it's all up to whether or not the people we've been contracted with are cool with me having quote unquote sightseers along. So I have to ask both my company and the landowner. And typically it's been pretty cool so far.
Nice. All right. And of course, wow. Okay. Much love to Constellation Pegasus for $49.99. This is for Josh.
Wow.
That's it.
And that is Constellation Pegasus. You rock. When I was a kid, Space 1999 was one of my favorite shows. And that's where he got his love.
Gotcha.
Oh.
Now, see, now
I feel like we should answer a question.
I'm trying. I have questions. I just have to prioritize super chats, but I just feel really bad. I don't have the music. Sorry.
No. I was saying like Constellation Pegasus ought to be like ask a question. We'll answer anything. That was awesome.
Well, you know what?
Well, let's do the thing, Jen.
Let's do the thing. Yeah. Okay. So the thing, let me put that up. So we're going to do the thing. So since Constellation Pegasus, technically this is $50. So the thing, moving forward, if you guys happen to like this show, I don't know why the fuck you would, but if you happen to still like your show and you're here, all 50 plus of you, moving forward, we will be hosting sponsored, sponsored questions, episodes, maybe featuring a certain particular guest, maybe just you posing a question and we talk about that, topic at nauseum or at length. But the key is you have to do one of two things. And this is how you get your own individualized sponsored show. And already Constellation Pegasus has been awarded that thus far. So you either need to donate a super chat to this show of $50 or more, or become a channel member to the TANG network. So if you would like a sponsored show in the near future featuring either Dr. Josh, Pat, or I don't know, Dr. Kit Davis, any other brilliant people.
That's who the people want. I mean, let's just be honest.
That's
they want
who
Dr.
the people
Kill.
want. Yeah. Or you want Oz to say something funny and sound really smart by doing it. Who the fuck cares? Donate $50 to this show. And this show runs every second and fourth Saturday. Is that correct, gentlemen?
Yes.
All right. So either donate $50 or more to Super Chat, $50 or more to the show, or become a new channel member and you will have your own sponsored show. Constellation Pegasus, email it's tanggang@gmail.com for whatever topic question you would like your sponsored show to have, because now we have one.
And thank you very much for that. But give us more than one topic just in case we can't get what you want. Give us like this or that, because some of the topics would be like something Josh and I can't do. It's not our specialty, and we can't get someone to come in. So give us one that either we could do, or if we're going to invite someone, we have a couple options on it. So give us a couple ideas, but it's your show. It will be this show brought to you by Constellation Pegasus.
Exactly. So yeah, again, Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much. Go ahead and email it's tanggang@gmail.com for whatever question, topics you would like for your future sponsored show to be. And of course, we'll put your name in the credits. You will be special. And of course, Heathen Queen says, I will donate $50 for Josh to do a show shirtless. I want to see the check. Thank you. Moving on to questions.
I told you it was going to be less serious, and Josh is going, yeah, I didn't realize that meant that
Just
less serious.
Allow him to be a little pink for a little bit.
Exactly.
Gurmania, I told you I put this up, so you asked it. Fair enough. Question for Pat. Why does he support an 8-day week? Question for Dr. Josh. Why did he sleep in philosophy class? Pat, you go first.
Those are two very good questions.
I support the 8-day week because I was very Gur is really I love Gur, great friend, YouTube friend. He will never let us meet us in person because he's in witness protection. But the private joke. The issue being that Derek from Myth Vision has been a big supporter of me and Josh. Josh and I, again, and Derek, brought this whole debate attention, which is now over. But like, it's just, again, thanks for being so supportive, both to Gur and to Derek.
Heck yeah.
Sorry, did you answer the 8-week
No, you didn't.
question?
I would.
I feel like you're being you're obfuscating and prevaricating.
Well,
Yeah.
I would support an 8-day week if it was divinely inspired.
It's a good answer.
Fair enough. Dr. Josh.
Yeah, I think what I would say to somebody like Gur Mania, right, is he can't even spell philosophy. I mean, look at that. Doesn't even know that it's spelled with an F. And I know how to ground the ultimate necessary preconditions for the ultimacy of the possible impossibilities, providing for the substance and instantiation of all beings. So, suck it.
Good answer. Thank you, Gurmany. This is not really a question, but it was kind of funny. So much worldly wisdom in this discussion. If only they had the guidance of
If only.
Holy Spirit.
If only.
If only. Thank you, Captain Deadpool. This is a question from Aaron. What's the difference between cultural memory and history?
Okay, so if we're writing it down sometime around when it happened, we generally refer to it as history. It's a gray area. It's a little nebulous. But if we're writing down something that supposedly happened a long time ago, particularly, and cultural memory is very common in non-literate, then later literate societies. So a pretty good example is the Old Testament, right? Moses wasn't writing. If Moses, I don't believe Moses existed, but the idea that there was something happened a long time ago and people passed it down orally. Oral tradition tends to fall into this idea of cultural memory, that we believe a thing happened a long time ago because our ancestors told us about it. But then some person goes, hey, we learn how to write now. Maybe I should write this down. So they write it down as an ancient account. And what that is a recording of what was probably a cultural memory, often known as an oral tradition or anything. I mean, all the terms are fairly synonymous, versus someone going, hey, I'm alive at this time, and 30 years ago, this happened. Now, still, it's something that happened before, but it's contemporaneous enough that we just say, well, that's just a history versus something that seems to be a cultural memory. And some cultures still exist in cultural memory, by the way. Like modern indigenous people of North America still have some traditions that are completely maintained by cultural memory. We call them traditional stories, things like that.
And if I could, again, not my area, we're going to be talking about this because Mark Lucher's written about this. He's going to be talking about this in the Exodus, on that Exodus panel on Heathen Queen's channel on the 17th. I think I've already forgotten the date, but I think it's the 17th. But Ronald Hendel wrote on this, like it's his thing about the Exodus is to look at it from the position of cultural memory. So if you're interested, he's out at Berkeley, Ronald Hendel. And in fact, there's a book, a 2021 book that came out. It's an evangelical publication. It's like 5 views on the Exodus or something. James Hoffmeyer did the more progressive evangelical position, but or a more progressive. But Ron Hendel was asked as the non-evangelical to come in and write, and he wrote on cultural memory. So yeah. Anyway.
And this is a big field in anthropology, by the way. Like anthropologists love this.
Okay, well, Constellation Pegasus just deserves a whole series because he has another donation to the show. Thank you, $99.99. How about a show on dating the solar system and Earth, or just pick one chapter in Josh's as a topic for a show? I mean, wow, I agree.
Well, you got 2 shows. Let us get a few out of the gate, but we appreciate it very much for this support.
I feel really bad for not having the drinking music. God damn it. Okay.
Do you want me to beatbox or something? I could beatbox.
Yes, please.
Welcome up. Oz is sitting back going, oh my God, what? Never again. Never again is he coming on this show.
After this amount of audience participation, I guarantee you we're gonna have the best graphics, the best intros, the next and thank you, because that'll this response, we were kind of worried that you guys would think we were boring.
No, I mean I'm happy. Obviously these two gentlemen are happy, and I'm glad y'all in the audience are happy. So yeah, Oz is creating a fucking mix song right the fuck now. So you may just have your own intro in like 2 weeks. No, again, constellation passes, obviously you've earned 2 sponsored shows. You've earned fucking all of it, but thank you, appreciate it. All of you appreciate the donations, like really something. Next question here, got quite a few. Scott Duke, besides the writers of Genesis 1 and 2, what non-Israelite cultures try to demythologize, I can't talk, demythologize, I even said that wrong, the moon, sun, sky, oceans, etc.?
So to demythologize is like,
right, to remove the supernatural causation or I don't know if we can actually say that the ancient Israelites actually like the celestial bodies, like the initial, like the Genesis account's not a clear distinction that Yahweh is a singular entity when you actually get into the text in the Hebrew, from my understanding. Like when it's talking, like, okay, that's it.
Oh no, so Genesis 1, the priestly narrative is certainly demythologizing certain aspects. So the one that sort of stands out is the use of the deep to home. Without going into like a whole bunch of, actually, in chapter 7 of my book, of volume 2, I talk about this. But to home, if you know that the Mesopotamian text, the Akkadian text, the Enuma Elish, Tiamat is the sea goddess that is like the major enemy of Marduk. And so Tiamat comes from the same cognate, Tamtu. Tamtu means sea. So Tiamat, Tamtu, and you can hear the connection. And then Tehom, you hear the connection there as well. So what Genesis 1 is arguably doing, sorry, I'll make this quick. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk is so powerful that he defeats this really powerful enemy just by approaching. No fighting has to take place. He just defeats him by approaching him. So sort of like what Pat did very recently, just the approach, just enemy fell down flat. Sorry, I couldn't help it. But in Genesis 1, the Tehom is appearing to be demythologized, so much so that it's not even something that is in contention with Yahweh. Now, that doesn't mean that everywhere else, like you look in the Psalms, there's certainly places where, or in Job, or like these are places where you see this mythology still taking place, right? You have the primordial chaos that's fighting, Yahweh's fighting it. But I mean, that there certainly are places. But as far as to Scott's question, like other non-Israelite cultures demythologizing, so trying to, I don't know that I would say that I know of any. That doesn't mean anything because my focus is very much Mesopotamian. But
it does occur in certain Greek philosophical traditions. The Epicureans were one of those schools that, were asking questions like, if we think the sun is a natural thing, why are we still venerating Apollo? So again, modes of inquiry. And although you may not, early Christians were starting to demythologize, to engage in this practice as well. So it wasn't, again, I think in order, the impetus to do this was one that was either philosophical because you were heading towards naturalism, which the Epicureans seemed to be heading that way, whether or not they were true atheists of their day or just atheists, which is problematic in the Greek, versus a theological construction where you need to be monotheistic. So two different ways of getting at the same thing, and having the same necessity to kind of to look at literature and other what would be cultural norms and systems that existed in those time periods.
All right, and we have a just because super chats take priority again. Thank you so much for all your support, everyone. We have $5 Canadian from, I'm gonna butcher the name, so there you go. Gus, Dr. Josh and Pat, can you speak a little about how the Hebrew months names were influenced by Babylonian month names as an example of culture transference?
So I'll just say this because Pat, this is absolutely your question. But Al is a great guy. Spent a lot of time with him at BajaCon.
So these are the kind of things we see, a period where the names appear to have maybe have just been listed by number for a period, but definitely in the exilic period and post-exilic period, all of the traditional month names. Now, understand there may be some issues with, there were some Canaanite names as well that may have actually been used, and we don't know exactly what the Hebrew calendar looked at exactly, but definitely once the exilic period happens and then the post-exilic period, the calendar names are almost universally adopted from the Babylonian system, even down to where they even preserve the names of gods of other pantheons in their monotheistic calendar. Kind of problematic. So it was almost wholesale, and as cultural transference, again, this is a major cornerstone of anthropology. This is exactly what you expect. A minority group by size is taken by another culture into a region, suppressed and forcibly maintained within that area, and forced to assimilate to a certain level. Not all assimilation is necessarily received as negative by people. We tend to think that, but people who could, one thing about humanity is we can show you it happens in every culture. I'm going to use the Gauls, for example, because we always assume that when Caesar conquers the Gauls, and he doesn't conquer all of them, he only conquers about a third of the tribes. A third go, hey, Caesar, we're your buddies, and about the other third are on the fence. They don't actually get involved in the fighting. Kind of what happens. When this happens, everybody assumes, well, Caesar came in, he suppressed these people, they'd be resisting all of these Roman ideas because they hate the Romans. Only the people that lost. There were immediately some people that said, hey, I was on the winning side. I supported Caesar. Let's do all this Roman stuff. Roman stuff's cool. I'm willing to learn Latin. But even in the suppressed group, being suppressed sucks. So you go, hey, what can I do to my oppressor to get a one-up on my buddy? I don't like being the guy who pushes the millstone cart every day. Maybe I can be the guy that bosses the millstone cart guys around. Oh, you mean I got to learn some Persian to do that? I learned Persian. I'm up a rung. So now even within that oppressed group, you have people scrambling to engage the cultural system that will allow to give them the greatest social mobility. Social mobility happened in the ancient world, even among oppressed people. And so when people think, it was just, it's not Ben-Hur, everybody on a galley till they die. But even in Ben-Hur, there were people in charge who were just on the same rung, but then were in positions above. Like, people don't understand how these systems work. There is a positive motivation to emulate your conqueror. Emulating your conqueror is a way to not be suppressed as much anymore, because the conqueror sees you more and more in their group. And once you are no longer unidentifiable, guess what? A king comes in, frees you, lets you go back to your home country. Oh, did I say that out loud?
Dr. Josh?
Oh, no. That's that was the answer.
Very good.
Divinely inspired.
Divinely inspired, yes. And of course, $10. Heathen Queen, thank you, love, for the support. Josh, Pat, how do y'all feel about me thrashing Terry? Pat first. No, Josh first.
I did a lot of laughing last night.
I did a lot of
laughing.
Okay.
Very very witty. It's very quick.
Very very Pat slappy, I would say. I would think so. I would say very passive. How would you say? I know you had some time.
I have mixed feelings. because
Oh.
it's really fun to watch, and I love the support. But if you're trying to be in a debate and people are making really good zingers, you start laughing internally, and then it throws your shit off. So like when all these one-liners about meet me in a parking lot like are going down the side, I'm going, and first of all, then I quickly visualize what that would look like, and that's funny.
Catch me outside.
So I appreciate it 100%, and I actually tried to call you today to tell you how much I appreciate your support, and thank you very much.
Hell yeah. And someone please link Courageous the link to Germania's hosted debate of Pat Lowinger and Terry Stanley. It was amazing. Thank you. It was a debate, yes. That Terry obviously won. Just because it's super chat, that has priority. Mark Reed, thank you so much for the Australian $20. These Australian $20. Yeah, that didn't sound right. These conversations are amazing. Thanks so much for sharing all of this knowledge with us, and appreciate you, Mark Terry. Thank you.
That's very kind.
And
Very,
eventually
very
Mark Reed may be one of those people that in a future episode way down the road may be coming on to me and talk about how we manage modern data information systems, so people can understand that when you Google the YouTubes, like a lot of shit happens to make that actually happen in a network system. Like this is what this show's going to be about, education. I mean, all Josh and I have to know about is old shit. That's easy.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we want. Just, a little variety out here on the Tang Gang Show. And thank you, Enter, for linking that. And yes, Courageous, you missed a debate. How dare you? Love you. All right. We have a few more. Let's run through it here from Humanist Fellowship Assembly. Jared, hello. If you had to put a number on it, what percentage of the Bible would you say is historically accurate according to the findings of modern archaeology?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah, I mean, so I'd only be able to speak to the Old Testament, so I don't know that I could put a number on it. A better way to say it for me might be, the further back you go, the less reliable it becomes. So, like, I would say back to David, right, in the United Monarchy. I don't want to say that it's you can read it and this is what happened, right? But there's a lot of spin, for example, that goes on with David. You don't spin shit that you're making up, right? So like there's a lot of, I think, historical reliability. Joel Baden has written an excellent book on this on David. But so going back to like the 10th century or something, I think there are a lot of good scholars that would say that at least the book of Judges in some ways presents early Israelite formation in the Iron One. But I mean, certainly you can't just like read it and say this is what happened. But start going back into the Conquest, go back into the Exodus, go back into the patriarchs. Is there a guy named Moses? Yeah, maybe. But I mean, like, it's not that guy. Right. And was his name Moses? Who the hell knows? Right. Is there an Abraham? I mean, like, there might have been a guy that some of the stories.
Oh, now you're going to get into the whole Jesus of the myth thing.
But yeah, I mean, I would say certainly like the primeval history, it's mythological, certainly a polemic, I think, against, Mesopotamia. But, where do these patriarchal traditions come from? But you can't, the point is you can't just pick up the book of Genesis and like read about Jacob and say, here's what happened. Right? It doesn't work that way. So I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Yeah. So I would say very little of it. And I would say, what's your reliance? Like when, like are many of the cities mentioned in the Old Testament and even New Testament, that's probably pretty reliable. We tend to find cities, not all of them. So we don't even have but we're more confident that if a city was mentioned, that the city might have existed. But that doesn't mean there's a lot of texts that do that. I mean, no one ever goes in and says, well, man, every cuneiform tablet has to be accurate, although they actually typically are much more accurate because they're talking about cities that existed, right? Like, we don't find everything. Sometimes cities are just projections of, again, cultural memory that is confused. But Josh is absolutely right. Like, the further you get away from the time the text is assembled, it becomes more problematic. Like the David question is actually a really good question. Like, again, Joel Baden is one of the leading experts on this, but I don't think even Baden would say, I'm 100% convinced that David exists. It's my professional academic position that David existed for these reasons, right? Like I read his book. I'm less convinced than maybe he is, because I look at a lot of foundational myths in Greek texts where the ancient Greeks, they swore this guy fucking existed. And guess what? His grave, later archaeology revealed, was specifically designed to look like it had been occupied in life. There was this great, the initial people that did it said, okay, they didn't think of it as faking it. They thought, well, this is what it would look like if he existed, and we believe he did. Now, I know it sounds weird, but we have to make this great ancestral person actually exist.
Now, to make it a thing.
Right. And I always look at, one thing I learned looking at both ancient Near East and the rest of Mesopotamia, when you look at who this person in history is, look at their name. Is their name have some bizarre, uniquely important meaning for who and what they are in their story, right? Like, no one, like, if you were to be a linguist and someone says, hey, I'm going to tell you about a story about a guy, a really important guy, who his story goes like this. And he was a slave, but then his parents were slaves. And he was going to be executed for being a little boy, but they stuck him in a raft and they sent him down, and he was found by a princess. And the princess named him, I draw you from the water. Right? That's a literary invention. That's called mythology. Right? If it's a story about a guy named Jack, much more believable. Like Adam. Why is Adam named Adam? Yeah. Oh, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like this is it. Noah. You know, they start looking at these people's names, and their actual stories contained in their name. It's like almost an abbreviation. That is a major red flag to me. And David may actually fall into that category, because the way he's later, like what David means in later tradition. Now, I don't think Baden's wrong, but the archetype of who David is for me a little confused. Is he a real guy that was known as David, or does David someone that gets created later from a real person? I'm very confused. Like again, not my area of expertise, but it's a little less clear for me than maybe it is for Joel Baden.
That's interesting. I never really thought of it that way. Like, actually look at the person's name and it relates to the actual story that's told. I never really. It's actually a good perspective. Thank you for that. Okay, we have a lot of questions, so we're going to run through these. All right. Kat the Humanist. Pat, what's the most number of layers of civilizations you have dug through? I like that question.
Chronological context. We'll call them occupations context. So I think the most, and probably the most scary, was one in Romania. We started digging. The Germans, again, you understand, archaeology is about all the history. Germans during and the Romanians who were initially on the side of the Germans, won't talk about that because the Iranians don't admit it. They were fighting the Russians. So they dug these bunkers. So we had all this World War II archaeology that we went through, and we're told that they had gotten all the explosives out. Wrong. And so we dug down with pitchforks into, glad that none of the stuff exploded when we found it. We dug through that. Went into a period of real late medieval, through a medieval layer, all the way down to the period of Roman occupation. So each of these centuries we're digging through, and we're actually, it took years in Romania digging through in this one area that we're excavating to get down to the area where we're actually looking at what was the 5th and 6th century CE, late Roman Byzantine context, right? So I've dug through like 2,000 years of history at one time, because I have gotten down to like what we'd call the 1st century CE in places. So I've dug through a lot, and in one season I've gone through like 1,000 years of time. Like it's very, it just, sometimes you're lucky that you're not finding a lot of stuff, so you can, what we call, punch through it. Like, hey, wow, this is something we can punch through because we don't expect to see a lot of material in these levels of occupation because they were there for a long time, or that the deposition layer or context is pretty thin. And Joss has got me fucking saying layer now. So So I mean, and it varies. Sometimes I've dug, like when we do graves, you dig one thing. Like and again, you may, if you are in a graveyard, you may only dig down literally 1 foot over the course of 4 weeks, because you're using the equivalent of a spoon. Oh, it's a very small trowel, and a paintbrush. And so there, you know, you're really only revealing one grave, which is literally happened at one time. That grave was a single chronological event. So you're digging up what happened on that day. So sometimes it can be you reveal one day at a time too.
So either one day or you,
1,000
if
years.
I recall, 1,000 years. Thank you. All right. Fair enough. Well, and Humanist Fellowship Assembly did appreciate the response. Thanks, guys. Great show and great answers. I'll definitely be buying Josh's book soon and really look forward to new episodes of this show. Thank you, Jared. Appreciate that. Digging is cool. Digging is cool. And Aunt Jer says Pat likes to punch down. Nidimus. Hi, Nitty. Thank you for the super chat of $1.99. Okay, Doctor Who. I don't get the reference. I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't watch it. Sorry. Next question. Oh no, we already did yours. Mark Reed. Is there a problem with religious bias in the fields of history and archaeology? And if so, how prevalent is it?
So it's diminishing, I think. Certainly in archaeology, at least in Palestinian archaeology. So I write about this in volume 1, chapter 3, which is like the intro to archaeology chapter that I wrote. Yeah, I mean, it was up until, I mean, even through people like William Foxwell Albright in the middle of the 20th century, like that they all just like they concluded that the Bible is generally historically reliable. But just the more they did, this is why it's so funny to me to hear people like Mike Winger and they say everywhere archaeologists dig, they prove the Bible, they prove that, and bullshit, right? I don't know. Did you guys hear me say that? Bullshit. It's bullshit.
It's bullshit.
Yeah, it's not what happens, right? You have these archaeologists go out and they excavate. It doesn't really work, and so things have to adjust. And so now, these aren't questions that we're really asking as much anymore. They are not asking as much. It's what actually is going on. We're not the short way that they used to say that is they dig with the Bible in one hand and the spade in the other, right? They don't do that anymore.
And the great thing about it is many countries are closing their heritage sites for excavation for that reason. And I'm not going to throw any particular institutions under the bus, but there are some universities that in some ways are very prestigious that they don't get archaeological permits anymore because it's been demonstrated they come in with a overly enthusiastic theological bias, and then this country lets them in, and then later a lot of the work they did and a lot of their publications are later debunked, right? And so that not only embarrasses the archaeological community who are helping these countries pick and choose who gets to come in and dig, but it also it embarrasses the field in general. So now it's like, this is actually, I've actually watched this happen. I've watched a very prominent archaeologist pick up the phone and call someone and said, "Hey, I hear you're giving this person a permit. I know I'm not the first person to call you, but do you understand this is this person's nationalistic political agenda to dig at that site? Are you aware that they're a nationalist?" And that has a certain term in archaeology. And then the person goes, "I wasn't aware of that would be a problem." And then you realize that person doesn't get a permit. That happens in the archaeological community as well when it comes to overly zealous, what we call, again, the term biblical archaeology can be confusing. It used to mean one thing like Josh decided, but they're reimagining the term today. But someone who comes in and says, I'm digging to prove the Bible, they're less likely to get a permit now. And then they may be allowed to be on staff and be part of an excavation, but that's someone holding their hand the whole time saying, "Hey, You don't get to interpret this the way you want. You're part of a larger collective body.
Yeah.
So just throwing money into archaeology now, that used to be the way you got a permit, by the way, was just go to a country, say, here's a bunch of cash. Can I dig here and find Jesus? It's true. And now it's like, you still pay for the permit, and we're going to have our people on site, a team that's watching you on site because we're questioning your methodology, and you're just part of a 30-person per panel. And we're not going to say you can't be a theologian looking for a proof of the Bible, but you don't get to stick a Bible in that ground, cover it with dirt, and say it's magic. Because the largest amounts of archaeological fabrication occur with religious objects. Think about that. The number one thing that's faked in museums and everything around the world, that because it pays big money, are what we consider religious artifacts or religiously adjacent objects.
Which is why it's so, like, the Shroud of Turin is so amazing, because it's, it's real.
Yeah, says Otangelo. Good old Otangelo. I know you're out there. Anyways, next question. Grumpy old Cuss. Question for Pat. Why do you keep trolling me?
Because I love him. It's a love troll. It's like a little troll doll with pink hair, and I'm just in love. I mean, Grump's a great guy.
Did you describe yourself as a troll doll with pink hair?
I did.
Can that be a sponsored show? $50 if you want Pat to dress up as a troll doll with pink hair. $50 sponsored show.
Shit.
Watch someone do it. Oh God, I fucked up. Germania's question for both. Who would Dr. Josh and Pat love to debate? Hovind, Craig, etc.
No. There's a couple archaeologists that I'd like to talk to that are on the not creationist side, but on the more that are still kind of credible in the field. There's some people out like from Baylor University and some other places that they're avowed just to say, like, how do you get through this information? I don't want to do a debate where it's just like banging my head against the wall. I did that. I want to actually talk to qualified academics who have a faith claim and actually parse out how do we get through the confirmation bias that faith brings along with it, like a faith
Name
claim.
one qualified academic.
Shit. Off the top of my head. Well, Josh named a couple. The guy out in Palestine, he's one of the 5 guys in the book you mentioned.
Oh, James, you talking about James Hoffmeyer?
Yeah. Hoffmeyer
Yeah,
would be someone I'd like to talk about archaeology. I don't know if I'd debate him. I'd maybe look at his methodology, like, hey, when you're doing this contraction through the narrative, given what we see in the archaeology, but I almost think that might bore people. Like, that's kind of thing we do over coffee, and things like that. I might want to, for me personally, rather than debating people like this, I like to talk to a lot of people that are interpreting things. Like, there are a few Romanian archaeologists that deal with the Romanian Orthodox Church I'd like to talk to. Again, I want to debate early Christian archaeology for me about, like, hey, why were all these mausolea made empty? Nobody's ever in them. Why were all these false crypts created for martyrs? That's what I want to know. Well, you can't prove they're false. Yeah, but I can also prove that there was initially no body stuck into them. Like there are things we can prove in the archaeological record. And again, that's it. Like, well, you can't prove it. Yeah, but you can't show it was there. And the information, like, no one looks like they dug down to dig and take this body out. There's no body in it today. The site appears undisturbed. Why was it empty? Well, you can't prove it was empty. Right. I can't prove that someone didn't do a really good job covering their tracks. Now think about the burden on me as an archaeologist. Someone purposely uncovered this, then placed it back very neatly so that we'd almost not be able to detect it. And again, that's like the criminal undoing the forensic analysis. Like, oh, I hid the DNA and I did this. And we all see the crime scene shows, but it's really hard to do with archaeology. But you can do it. I mean, especially if you're not expecting to try to be fooled. Like, I go to a site, I'm like, we're not seeing what we need to see. The people knew how to lift their dirt out in context and then stick it back in context. This happens. Like, don't think that there isn't some problems with this in archaeology as well. Purposely manufacturing a site to look older too. People would go, hey, let's make it look older. Let's stick some really old stuff in the bottom of this and bury it up again and let some real archaeologists find it later. And then they'll verify that Moses actually parted the Red Sea, shit like that.
Great. John?
I would say just very briefly, I don't debate one-on-one anymore. I've realized that my MS makes it very difficult to think quickly, and I'm not very good at rhetoric. So I always have a partner now so that I can sort of sit back and think things through a little bit before I have to answer. So Dr. Kip Davis and I have, whatever the word would be, challenged Mike Winger and What Do You Meme, John McGarey, to have a debate on slavery in the Hebrew Bible. That has not yet been accepted. But that would be really great because not because they're like great scholars, but they're so influential. They have such huge followings, and people watch their videos and think, "Oh, well, this must be it."
I'd like to go against Winger. Now that you mentioned that, like if he ever actually wanted to do something, anybody who calls themselves an archaeologist and is saying that they found the Ark, any of those archaeologists, I'll take on.
I figured that would get in your craw. All right. A couple more questions because we are like past 2 hours, y'all. Calm the fuck down. I'm just going to take the questions that, because I know some of you are repeaters, so I'm just going to take ones that weren't offered. But of course, do need to offer the super chat, the love. Thank you, Humanist Fellowship Assembly. What is your favorite book of the Old Testament and why?
My answer is generic. I like all 5 equally of the Pentateuch. When people ask me what's your favorite book of the Bible, I like the Pentateuch.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dr. Josh?
I've never thought about that.
Pick something really awkward, like Habakkuk, something like that.
I'm a big fan of Zephaniah. You know, that's my jam. I like Jeremiah. I like translating. I just like translating through it. But that has nostalgic. That's one of the things that I did in seminary. It was like the really fun class that I took. But yeah, I like Exodus.
Okay.
Sorry.
For any particular reason?
Yeah, I mean, it has quite a bit in it. And certainly I've spent so much time in it because of Exodus 21.
The slavery part, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Oh gosh, Constellation Pegasus, for the win, $9.99. Thank you so much again. Did European gargoyles come from? Because it's super, I gotta read. Did European gargoyles come from fossils that were found? I read something that like that in archaeology magazine some 20 years ago. Been wondering about that lately. It's very curious. That's a very curious $10 question.
It's a great question. So gargoyles from Gothic period forward context are not my area of expertise or specialization. But in an earlier context, I'm more than willing to talk about what we call early medieval depictions that are similar. The placement of images around houses, particularly in early Christian and earlier pagan contexts. They were designed to ward off evil spirits. And anything that could be used as one of these foci, be it an animal skull or other objects that were created in like ceramics, like a Gorgon face, Medusa, Gorgon face in Greece, right? To place, just to keep the evil spirits away from house. They served a lot of these purposes. There's two major, my understanding is there's two major from the Gothic period forward, when we see them on big churches. It was two things. Could it have been influenced by fossils? We do know that ancient people from the Neolithic period forward used fossils when they found a fossil. They'd actually use it as a piece of architecture. Hey, I found this fossil when we're cutting stone. This is awesome. It was an object of art of its time, but they also believed it had sacred meanings as well because the shapes with swirls and different things. At least that's the leading consensus. And then we have the formation of these so yes, there are some people that believe that it's more than one influence that comes into why gargoyles look the way they do. If you were to ask me, well, I want one answer, my answer is no. My answer is these are creatures that were designed to be really, really scary to ward off evil spirits. Like you looking at a church today, you're like, oh, gargoyles are just really nice water spouts, and they're just pieces of art. Not at the time they were actually stuck there. At the time they were stuck there, they would believe have to possibly be believed to have supernatural. At least some of the people believe that. The architect going, I have to put gargoyles up here because all the people of the village have decided that they're evil spirits and we don't want them to get in the church. No, that doesn't mean everybody believed it. Believed that it was enough of a custom that it was maintained.
Thoughts, Dr. Josh? Final words, Dr. Josh.
No, it's a good answer, Pat. I know absolutely nothing about European gargoyles.
Good answer. Good answer. Good answer. Well, then, I again appreciate all the super chats, all the love. Like, I mean, you guys are here for these two gentlemen. So thank you, both of you. Thank you, Pat and Dr. Josh, for this show. Obviously, it's a need. Obviously, people are excited about it. And I think maybe we do a few more. Maybe a few more.
Yep. Yeah. Josh will be back in a month. I'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Last little announcement. We will have the next show. You're going to see a bunch of names because we're going to have occasional recurring panelists that will be on the show. Josh and I have reached out to people that we kind of think have a lot to offer. We tried to find people with degrees. In some cases, they've just been doing something for 40 years and they're an expert on it. So, but we trying people that were like, hey, they're a recognized expert in this. So when we have a question about, like, I have a pharmacist friend of mine, she'll be on it. She's going to be our resident pharmacist. So we're talking about drugs in the ancient world. Hey, let's have a pharmacist on to talk about how these drugs actually would work in the human body, rather than Josh and I going, oh.
I mean, that's fair. Yes. Dr. Josh, I guess we will be seeing you in a month, but any final words, thoughts? Appreciate you being here.
Oh, no, I just, the audience has been absolutely incredible tonight. And obviously, Pat, you as well. It's just been a lot of fun. Yeah, I would just say, given everything we've talked about, like, make sure you go to Heathen Queen's channel on the 17th and watch that Exodus panel, because again, I'll be there, but I will be pretty quiet, because when you have Karakuni and Mark Lucher in the same, room, it's like, you just want to soak it in, just want to live it up.
It's funny when you can tell that when you actually have the person that you can actually use the phrase, they wrote the book on this. And it's really the fucking book on this. It's always like, a few years ago, I got to be introduced to Ramsey McMullen. If you're a Roman historian, he's the guy that wrote the book on Rome, on like how we study Rome today. And so people go, well, no, who's that? I'm like, well, he's the guy that wrote the book on what? On Rome. He's the guy.
That's the guy.
That's the guy.
Well, perfect. Well, yes, tune into that with Dr. Josh on Heathen Queen's channel on next Saturday on the 17th. What time was that for? I couldn't find the link. If there's the link, I apologize. I could not find it, so I can just link you guys there. But
I don't remember.
Since Heathen Queen's in the chat, click on her name, subscribe to her channel. That way you'll
definitely
be notified when that shit goes live.
Awesome.
Please do. But later on tonight, of course, when Oz is off work, he'll be back here at 1 a.m. Eastern time to review this guy. I pointed the wrong way. This guy's debate with the 7-day dude who's in the chat. Hi, Terry. So we will be reviewing that later on tonight. Again, appreciate you all. Can You Dig It? We'll run every second and fourth Saturday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for all the love and support of these two gentlemen, and we'll see you both of you in 1 month for Dr. Josh. I'm confusing it, but we'll see Pat in 2 weeks. Until then, thank you all so much and have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is for all you non-philosophizing black sheep, unwelcome, pushed to the side motherfuckers like me.
Fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah. Fuck what they say. TANG gang, Atheist Your Way. Let's get down to business. These bitches got glitches. And you thought you'd dismiss us? Nah. Now I'm laughing in stitches. See, the problem be, it'll be a tragic travesty to come after me. So just know this is how we get down. Respect that shit like a pronoun, bitch. Yeah. fuck what they say. Tang gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah, you fuck what they say. Tang gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah, fuck what they say. Tang gang, Atheist Your Way. Yeah, fuck what they say. Tang gang, Atheist